So about 7 years ago, I got into barbecue, and I learned that the holy grail of barbecue was brisket. So I went and bought a brisket and tried to do limited research on how to cook it, but I attempted, and I think I failed at the first one. I went to the grocery store and bought a marinade off the shelf and injected it. I bought all the tools like spray bottles and temp probes and injectors, and injected this brisket with some off-the-shelf marinade. The bark didn't really set, and I cooked it out of a barrel that I had at the time, and my cousin and I thought that it was the best thing ever. It was so oily from the marinade, but since then I've definitely grown as a backyard grill enthusiast. So today I'm going to show you everything I've learned off of YouTube since 7 years ago. All right, so before we bring the brisket over, we're going to go ahead and get our rub ready. So we're going to do 2 parts coarse black pepper. And we got a pretty good sized brisket today, so we're going to make a lot of this rub. And if you don't use it all, that's okay. You can always use salt and pepper in pretty much anything. And then we're going to use 1 part salt. Now what I'm using today is some coarse ground kosher salt, and it's a really big piece of meat, so it's not going to be too salty. And then what I found from a lot of YouTube guys, I watch a lot of Texas barbecue, and I had found that one of their secret ingredients that they use is something called Lowry seasoned salt. So we're going to go with 1 part Lowry seasoned salt. All right, so let's give this a mix. So it's really heavy on the pepper, but we're gonna smoke this thing for so long that the harshness of that pepper is not even gonna affect the brisket, but it's gonna give us that really nice bark. So we'll mix this real nice. The reason I'm mixing it in the tin foil is because I'm gonna use this tin foil in the cook, and I'll show you what I'm gonna do with it in a minute. All right, so there's our rub that we're going to use. Now let's go ahead and go get our brisket. And here we have almost a 17-pound brisket. We're going to do a lot of trimming on this, so it's going to get it down to maybe 14 pounds, but still a really nice sized brisket. Now I'm going to be cooking for a party of about 50 in about a month or so, and I wanted to practice cooking a brisket in my offset because I haven't cooked a brisket in there yet, so I kind of want to get my timing down as well as like the texture and whatnot. So a lot of trimming going to be done. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so first we're going to hit this decal fat. It almost wants to pull away by itself, but a little assistance from a blade will make it a lot easier. And this is the stuff that's not really going to render down in your fire, but save it. I'm going to show you what we're going to do with all this extra fat. Then we're going to go ahead and clean up the top of it. Now the key to cooking a good brisket is to start off with a good quality one. This one's a USDA prime brisket. When we get down to some of the meat, I'll be able to show you some of the marbling that's in the meat. We're going to take off some of this silver skin. All right, then we're going to take off some of this ugly looking meat here from the front of it. So at the same time as trimming it, we're trying to give this thing a good shape also. So let's go ahead and flip this thing over. We have a really big fat cap on this. We want to trim this thing down just a little bit, but not too much, because we're going to cook it fat side up. So we've got some of this harder fat here, so let's trim this down. This fat's not going to really cook very well, but we're going to render it down. That's about as much as I'm gonna take off of this fat cap here. So let's flip us back over. Now let's kind of pound this. I'm gonna pound this, lay a little bit flatter so when smoke goes over, it's kind of an easier smoke. Okay, now let's shape this thing up here. This seems like it might be a waste of the meat, but we're actually going to save it. Give it a nice shape. Kind of give this a rounded edge here. That is looking pretty good to me. We might trim the edge up here just a little bit. This kind of stuff will just burn off, stuff that's just hanging off the edge. All right, and as you can see, here's our pile of meat that's left over. We can use, see, like this stuff is good for like burgers. My grinder's not here yet, but eventually I can save this and put it in with my other brisket trimmings. If you don't have enough of your brisket trimmings to make burgers or sausages, just save it, put it in the freezer, vacuum seal it. All right, so let's go ahead and get this thing ready for a rub. All right, I went ahead and changed one glove for my rub because remember, if we made too much, I want to be able to use that for other cooks. So what we have here is just some yellow mustard. We're gonna put this slather down and kind of rub it in, and we're gonna do meat side up first because remember our fat is gonna be our presentation side. So we'll rub this in real nice, get it nice and tacky, get the sides. And I just remembered my brand new glove. I just used it. So I'm gonna have to change gloves again. That's all right. We'll get that nice and rubbed in. It'll kind of get a little pasty and that's what we want. One side's done. All right, so after another glove change, we've rubbed our mustard in. Now we're gonna go ahead and hit it with our seasoning. Meat hand, season hand. And we're just gonna liberally apply this to our brisket. Don't worry about over seasoning it. It's a big piece of meat, be able to take it. I know we're calling it a rub, but we're not gonna really rub it in. We're just gonna kind of pat it to get it to stay. Don't forget the edges. Again, kind of just pat it in, use what's on the table. So let's flip this thing. Oh, it's still heavy. All right, same thing with this side. Let's get some mustard on there. Get it pasty looking. Okay, nice and pasty. Now, let's season this side. And that is looking good to me. When I transport it to the smoker, some of it's gonna fall off, but that's good. All right, so now that we've got this ready, we're gonna go get our pit ready. I'm not gonna use very much charcoal in there because I want our heat source to be wood. I'm gonna use a lot of post oak today. We're gonna dump this bag in there. And while we let our charcoal kind of burn down, another thing that I have found from YouTube was they would put a water pan in here and fill it with water. And from what I've gathered is that a humid environment cooks a lot more consistent than a dry environment. We're gonna have to top that off, so we'll keep our water bottle handy. And also the moisture that's gonna get drawn out from our cooking area without the water pan will be drawn out from our brisket, leaving us with a less moist brisket. So at least we have something that the heat can draw moisture from. And we'll set our brisket right about there. Another thing that I've learned is that use a couple of blocking logs in front of the brisket, so that way it doesn't give a direct blow of heat. The heat will kind of travel over and move its way across the brisket. So now with all that done, I'm gonna get our charcoal and our wood kind of started a little better. Then I'll close the lid of this and we'll check back in a little bit. All right, so we've got a bunch of brisket trimmings here that we're gonna kind of slice up. I always like to save some of the brisket trimmings because I'm going to make some brisket hamburgers or some brisket sausage, but we're slicing it up because we're gonna start rendering it down. We're gonna take our old tin foil and throw it in there. And we'll take some of these harder chunks here. We're gonna render it down for our brisket cook a little later. And the reason we're cutting it down is because it requires less heat to start to render it down. Now, use these ugly little fatty pieces that you're not gonna be able to really use in your sausage or your hamburgers. Use those first. It's all right, we've got a little pepper on there. So you go through your pile and get those ugly looking ones. That should be enough there. And we're gonna throw it on the smoker and hopefully get some smoke on this and also some rendered down beef tallow. All right, another trick that I have learned is take some of your beef fat and throw it on the fire. Now, they don't really say if this is gonna add in a bunch of flavor to the cook, but it'll definitely smell good. All right, so let's open it up. Our brisket is still going. It's been about, oh, let that smoke go. I just added in some wood, that's why it's so smoky. So the front end of our brisket is looking kind of charred up, so we might have to wrap that sooner than later. But overall, it's looking pretty good. I did add in some fat, you guys just see me do. Okay, so we're at about hour 3.5 or so. The front end is starting to look a little crispy, so what we're gonna start doing is starting to spritz it. What I have here is about half apple juice, half apple cider vinegar. You can pretty much use whatever you want. We're just hydrating the skin to keep it from burning. And I may end up putting a piece of foil on this end just to protect it. So let's spritz it, and we'll spritz it about once every 30 minutes or so. Now what's nice is that this spritz is gonna work for our ribs as well. We'll even spritz the logs to keep them from burning up. And we'll let that go. All right, so we're at the about hour 5 mark. We're looking pretty good. I kind of readjusted these logs to help block some of that direct heat coming onto our brisket. Our bark is not quite set yet, and I think that has a lot to do with the slather that we use in the mustard. That's the problem with using slathers. I think we're gonna get some foil and kind of wrap this back end here because it's starting to get a little darker than the rest of it. And again, it's because of that exhaust that's over there. So we want to kind of protect it from the heat. Our ribs are looking pretty good. We got a little bit of pullback from it. We'll go ahead and spritz that a little bit. We might get these ribs wrapped here very shortly. But our brisket's looking pretty good. Kind of spray it down. I've been tending to the fire quite frequently and will continue to do that. Our fat has pretty much rendered down, so we can actually take that out. Right, so I went ahead and pulled off our beef fat. We've pretty much rendered off everything that we're gonna need out of it. I've already taken out the big chunks of it. Now, What I'm gonna use is this little mesh screen here, and we're gonna funnel it out into here. You could go through with a coffee filter or something if you guys wanna use this for something else, but this is really just to get the big chunks out. Because you can see, as you can see here, we still have a bunch of little flakes of the stuff in there, but that's all right because we're gonna end up using it back into our brisket. But if you wanted to use it for something else, then put a coffee filter in here and let it filter out all that stuff. All right, and just a quick hour 6 update. We keep spritzing our brisket here. Bark is starting to slowly set. It's been about 6, maybe 6.5 hours. That over here is just the brisket trimmings that I took out of the pan. I just left them on the grill. I'll toss those in a little while. But we're looking pretty good. It's about hour 6. We'll probably switch our spritz here soon to a different type of recipe. But overall looking pretty good. So we'll go ahead and get this closed and let it keep going. All right, so we've now reached a point where it's time to wrap our brisket. The bark has been set and we've kind of hit a temperature stall. So we're gonna lay out some foil to get it ready to wrap. And let's grab the brisket. All right, so here's the brisket. Now our bark has been pretty nicely set on it. We've been kind of heavy on the bark, so some of it is still slightly falling off, but a lot of it has been set. So we'll go ahead and get this thing wrapped. Oh, we almost forgot one thing. Pour in our rendered out beef tallow. We just pour that right on top. All right, we'll continue to wrap this thing up. Now you could use some butcher paper or some foil. I've used butcher paper in the past and it tends to get the bark a little softer. I know a lot of people in Texas that do use it, but I feel like the texture of the bark for me is a little better when we wrap it up in foil. And we'll get this back over on the pit. All right, so we're just gonna put our brisket right back on top. We'll go ahead and close this up. We'll add some more wood to the fire and we'll check back in on it. All right, so we're approaching, I would say about hour 8 on this cook. We're not really looking for temperature, although it's at about 165 degrees. So we're still not done, but we're looking for more of consistency of when you kind of stab it. We're looking for a consistency of like peanut butter resistance on this probe. We're not there yet, so that part was a little tough. So we're not there yet, so we're gonna let it keep going until we get to that consistency. But something different that we're going to do today that I had seen on YouTube was after we get to about the consistency that we want, is we're gonna take it off the grill, we're gonna put it on a wire rack with a pan underneath, and we're gonna keep it in the oven overnight at about 170 degrees. Something, so if your oven can go really low, we're gonna give this thing an overnight rest, but before we do, I'll check back in with you guys. Oh yeah, and one more thing that I did forget to add is I just added some wood and charcoal to it. That's why it's so smoky. But anyway, one thing that I did forget to add was I was going to flip it to where the lean side is towards the heat source because the fatty side tends to cook a little faster because we are aimed towards it. So now we're gonna switch it to the lean side. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Whew, all right, so we're at about the hour 12 mark. And as you can see, we're losing some daylight. So what we're gonna do is I've already preheated my oven to about 200 degrees, 200, 225. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay the brisket on this, I have a wire rack here with a pan underneath. I'm gonna put the brisket on there, still wrapped up, and then put it in the oven overnight. Before I go to bed, what I'll do is I'll turn down my oven to about 175 degrees to rest it overnight, and we'll wake up in the morning and we'll see if it needs any more attention. All right, so one overnight rest later, this is what we've got. We'll go ahead and take off the top layer of this. Now, total, I want to say this brisket was resting in my oven for about 15 hours. Let's open it up. Oh, the bark is nicely set. Let's get this rack off. Get this pan from underneath this rack first. There it is, folks. It's looking nice. It's looking juicy and jiggly. We'll go ahead and take this drippings. We'll take this thing out. We did turn off the oven for about 20 or so minutes to let this rest with no heat. And as you can see, extremely juicy. Nice and jiggle, got the jiggle factor. Let's go ahead and cut into this thing. We'll cut it right in half. Still nice and steamy and juicy. Not really too much of a smoke ring. That's a little disappointing. Here's the lean side. We'll cut right into it. Couldn't wait. Nice and smoky. Piece of the lean here. Maybe I cut that one a little too fat. I think that the overnight rest would make it really holding up against its own weight. You would think that the overnight rest would overcook it and it'd be dried out, but you'd be really surprised. I mean, just look how juicy this thing is. We'll move this out of the way. We'll cut into some of these burn ends. Oh. Spreading apart. Let's try a piece of this. So I used to be really intimidated cooking a brisket just because it seemed like there was so much work and so many things that could go wrong. But with this type of direction that's all over YouTube, and you know, they make it really easy and it's fun to just keep trying. So until next time, you guys, I really appreciate all the subscribers that I'm getting. I'm really enjoying cooking all this food. So yeah, until next time, peace.